Welcome back to Rod's Radios. This is part 2 of the repair and restoration of the Philips B6X72A tube stroke valve radio. And in the meantime, I've made a little bit of progress on the repair to the dial drive mechanism. The problem that I was having before was that it wasn't moving the FM section at all. So let's see what I did in the meantime. With the flywheel off, I can see that it's the outer brass wheels that move sideways to contact the central rubber wheel. So it's to this that I need to pay attention. I've attached a fabric tape around the perished roller rubber to give it traction, but it's rotating freely around the shaft, which won't drive the adjacent brass wheels. So to remedy this, I've added some tape around the shaft of the flywheel, and now the rubber roller, covered in a layer of the tape, is securely in place, hopefully to drive the relevant brass rollers. The flywheel has been relocated, and here we are on one of the AM settings, and it's been more or less successful in that the needle is moving quite freely now. However, it is dragging both needles together rather than the individual AM. But that doesn't really matter. It's probably going to be as good as I'm going to get it. However, on FM, the lower needle is now moving absolutely perfectly. So that's a result. I don't think I'm going to get it any better because the diameter of the rubber wheel in the middle here is quite critical, and having added the tape on it onto the outside of it, it's made it slightly wider in diameter, and this is why it's dragging on AM. But as I said, it doesn't really matter as long as both tuners are now operating mechanically. I think we have a pretty good result. Thinking a bit more about the dial drive, I'm still not quite happy that both pointers are moving when the AM section is selected, as you can see here. So I think I'm going to have another go at this flywheel to see if I can improve the drive wheels, the pulleys behind it, in order to separate the AM drive from the FM drive. Yeah, I'm going to have a go. Well, a few weeks have passed since the last clip because I've been giving this a little bit of thought in the meantime, and I had another project that I needed to complete. So I've taken the flywheel off the mechanism around here that operates the dial drive, and you can see when I select FM, it moves this set of pulleys over to the right and engages in them in the center one, which would normally be in between them. However, when I press the AM switch, it isn't moving backwards in the other direction unless you actually push it like that, and there's a kind of a notch that allows it to move. So there's a plate behind here on which the two pulleys are mounted, and it's just not going back into position. It's pulled back into position by a spring, but there's something happening around the back here that I can't see, and no matter how much I oiled it, pushed it, pulled it, it's still kind of notched. It's moving over okay for FM, but it's not moving back for AM unless I push it back. So the only thing to do is to actually take this plate off to see what's happening in the back here. However, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pulleys around which various parts of the dial drive cords, whether they be metal cords or nylon cords, go around this network, and it's a nightmare. It's like central station here for pulleys as far as that's concerned. So I'm really afeared about what's going to happen when I take this plate off, because the whole thing is going to collapse. So I think what I'll do is, first of all, I'll make a drawing of the whole network of pulleys and wires and cords, and then I'll take a load of pictures as a record in case the whole thing goes haywire altogether. And then I'll try and secure, maybe with blue tack, the wire around some of the pulleys to keep some sort of semblance of the dial drive in place before I take this plate off, because when this plate comes off, the whole thing is going to collapse as far as the tension on the wires are concerned. So what's going to happen? Let's see. Here I've shrouded the pulleys in blue tack. It's a type of malleable putty in the hope that the cord doesn't fall off. This is a view of the rear of the pulley plate, and I've taken the opportunity in having it out to lubricate it, clean it up, retension the two springs in the hope that it'll make some sort of difference when I put it back together again. In the event, the dial drive went back a lot smoother than I expected, and this was in no great part to the blue tack that I had placed to keep the cords in place. So that was a relief. It did take quite a while all the same. However, it's back now, and I suppose the result is mixed. It's a lot smoother than it was before. The FM is still working absolutely perfectly up and down the scale. However, when AM is selected, both drives still move to some or all an extent. However, the big difference is now that when you move the AM needle down towards the right or left hand extreme, the FM needle doesn't drift off and get caught up in the pulleys, which is what was happening before. And the reason for this is that this pulley over here that connects the dial drive onto the FM tuning capacitor was actually loose, and it was moving freely around at each of its end stops. So I've tightened the screw that holds that in place, and it's made a huge difference. And I think I just have to accept that going forward, both needles will move when the AM buttons are selected. It's no big deal, because in a lot of radios this is what happens anyway. And I think it's in main to the wear and tear on the rubber wheel drive that's in behind here that engages in either of the two wheels, the AM wheel and the FM wheel. Also maybe the plate that's on the back here, which was showing a certain amount of wear and tear. So other than that, I can now move on to the next part of the restoration, which will be the recapping. I won't bore you with the recapping process, but here you can see what I've done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 capacitors at least, polypropylene capacitors, and 1, 2, 3 electrolytics. There's also 2 more polypropylene on the top side of the cabinet as well. One is connected onto the output transformer, and the other is actually in the cabinet itself between the 2 speakers. And down here you can see the capacitors that I've replaced. Most of them were these waxy ones, which are notoriously faulty. However, in this case I measured them all and they were all pretty accurate. So there's a surprise for a radio of this age. However, the electrolytics were all a little bit off, but nothing particularly to worry about. So again, this is quite surprising. However, I did replace them all. And over on the right hand side here you can see the volume control, which I've disassembled. This was quite scratchy, and also when you pull the shaft of the volume control slightly, it introduced a certain amount of hum. So I took the opportunity to take this off, and of course in the process managed to break one of the lugs off the volume control itself. So I've put a little solder tag on it and screwed it in place with a nut and screw. Hopefully that'll fix it. Now I did spray it with contact cleaner before I took it out, because taking it out was a bit of a messy process. It's in a very tight position. However, the cleaner made no difference to it whatsoever, so I've taken it out to look at it a little bit closer and check all the rivets that they're tight. I need to fix this because it's very hard to get a similar volume control replacement. It's a little bit different than an ordinary volume control in that it has 2 separate taps. Apart from the 3 connection points on the pot itself, there are these 2 taps. It's a 1 meg pot, and the taps are taken off at 100k intervals around the track itself. And these are connected to a various network of capacitors to give what is in effect a loudness control rather than a volume control, so that when you turn up the volume, or turn down the volume at least, you still get a reasonably good bass response. So hopefully cleaning this in its reconfigured state here that you can see will fix it. Fingers crossed. Originally the treble tone control over here on the right hand side of the chassis was seized solid, and along with the heat gun and some WD-40 I freed it up, so it's now working perfectly. And as you can see on the front here, as I turn it, it opens and closes this natty little shutter which reveals the graphic on the front, just to add a little bit of pizzazz to this radio. Likewise, over on the left, the bass tone control is now running freely, and it also opens and closes the shutter on the left hand side of the graphic. So they're both working fine. Now up top here we have the bracket, which is perched precariously on the top at the moment, which had the 3 tone control buttons that protrude through the front of the glass. And the right hand one is missing, so I'm going to have to do something about that. And what I'm thinking of is using a 5mm knitting needle to make a new button akin to what we have here already. It'll need to be maybe sprayed and coloured at the front and shaped, etc. So that gives me something to think about. But other than that, the next phase is going to be doing the recapping of this. So I'm going to spin the chassis over. As you can see, I have it mounted in my wooden frame here, which allows me to turn it around, spin it around without doing any damage. At this point, I'll end this section of the restoration, and in the next part address the tone buttons, check the alignment and clean up the cabinet and fittings. I hope you'll join me then. In the meantime, if you have been, thanks for watching.